Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to preview the Week 11 FanDuel main slate. Jared, we've got no Eagles or Chiefs this week. They're playing on Monday night. The Bengals and Ravens already played, and, some of them are still healthy. That's 4 marquee quarterbacks out of the mix on this Week 11 main slate. We've got big-time wide receivers and tight ends off the board as well, and even upside running backs on all 4 of the teams that are on bye this week. So it's going to be an interesting week to pick players. We'll see how that affects the way we choose guys from certain positions. Let's start at quarterback, though. And I checked the FanDuel dollars per point rankings in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com. I see 3 intriguing 7K guys up top, or 2 intriguing guys and Trevor Lawrence, depending on how you want to look at it. What is your quarterback plan for cash on FanDuel?
Justin Fields leads in dollars per point for us on FanDuel, and I think he's a nice tournament play. I would not use him in cash in his first game coming off a throwing thumb injury. I think Trevor Lawrence at 7K is okay. I'd rather pay a bit more for either Brock Purdy or CJ Stroud, our next 2 guys in value. Brock Purdy 7,500, CJ Stroud 8,000. I think they're it's for me tough to pick between them. I definitely prefer Stroud, but he's $500 more. So both their teams have a 26.75 point implied total this week. That's tied for 3rd highest on the main slate. Stroud gets the slightly better matchup. Arizona 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Purdy gets the Bucks, who are 21st in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. And it's a good matchup for Purdy too, because the Bucks are tougher against the run than the pass. And we've seen opposing offenses register the 3rd highest pass rate over expected against versus Tampa Bay. So offenses are tending to lean pass against this defense, which does make sense. Kyle Shanahan's smart. I do think the Niners will lean a bit more towards the pass. I think Purdy will have enough volume in this game to pretty easily pay off this price tag in cash games.
Tournament side, where you differ.
Yeah, so I love the Texans Cardinals game. Talked about it a bunch on the DraftKings podcast. You can listen to that if you want to hear, the reasons to play that game. I wanted to talk about Jared Goff here on FanDuel because I really like this spot for the Lions passing game as well. The Lions have the 2nd highest implied total on the main slate at 27.75 points behind only the Dolphins. And they get this pass funnel Bears defense. The Bears are 6th in run defense DVOA. They are 29th in pass defense DVOA. And as a result, they are 6th in pass rate over expected again. So really like a more extreme version of the Bucks, where the Bears are much better against the run than they are the pass. Teams are going pass heavy against Chicago. I think the Lions are going to come out that way. I think they're going to come out throwing in this game. Now they could definitely, go run heavy in the second half if this game turns into a blowout. But I think if you're playing Goff from a tournament side, you want to play it as the Bears, at least keeping this game competitive for most of the game. So you'd want to play a piece from the Bears. And for me, that would be DJ Moore is my favorite option. I think, Cole Kmet is someone you can consider at tight end. But if you're playing Goff, I think you definitely do want to run it back with the Bear, because you do need the Bears to score some points and keep this game close so the Lions don't go super run heavy in the second half.
I mean, frankly, even if you're playing it with whatever, like even if Detroit jumps out to a big lead and Jared Goff gets there, before the blowout ends, you're still going to get garbage time, extra passing from the Bears. So I think you still want to run back a Chicago player in those Jared Goff lineups, like you said. Running back, Jared, is it Tony Pollard week part 3? He's back down to $6,900 in FanDuel salary. He's got the Panthers this week. We mentioned him each of the past 2 weeks. He's got to find the end zone again at some point, right? Is this the last gotta?
Who knows? I mean, it's a sick joke by FanDuel making Tony Pollard this cheap, so it's kind of tough to avoid him in cash. I am going to end up playing him in cash. The other thing too, at some point you just want to like block people with Pollard, right? Because he's going to be so popular in cash games. And, if you don't play him and he does, find the end zone twice this game, it might, be tough to win in cash. I'm just going to play Tony Pollard. I mean, he's still the lead back on a team that's a 10.5 point favorite this week. The Cowboys have a 26.25 point implied total. And, in some ways, this spot is better for Pollard than last week's was, because the Giants suck against the pass and the run. And we obviously saw Dallas, lean pass again and have lots of success passing. Panthers are okay against the pass. They're 16th in pass defense DVOA. They're 31st in run defense DVOA. We see teams going run heavy against the Panthers. The Panthers have allowed the 2nd most running back rush yards per game, the most running back rush touchdowns per game. So, I mean, it's definitely a spot. Pollard should be a good touchdown bet. I think he's still a good volume bet. I'm just going to play him in cash at this price tag.
I mean, he showed us last week that he's not a lock against anybody because it was almost the same spot against the Giants last week. They did score 3 times on the ground, and he got 3 tries from the 4-yard line or closer. So keep all of those things in mind. That's why Tony Pollard makes plenty of sense. Even if he doesn't find the end zone again, like he had those opportunities last week, at some point he's going to fall across the goal line, even if he's not especially good at it. I don't think this team really wants to lean run against anybody. I think they'll still lean pass overall. But Tony Pollard got enough carries and enough chances to score last week to pay off. He just didn't. Well, I'm curious to see if they throw the ball to him, because they didn't do that at all last week. And that was maybe even the most surprising thing, maybe worrisome. Also might be a 1-week blip. So we'll see where that one goes. Turney's side, I would assume you're going to lean away from Tony Pollard, right? Because he's going to be a little too popular to be like, hey, if he finally has his bounce back week, I want to be on it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call him a must fade. But again, as we always say, you got to be careful about how you use him. Like, you'd want to use Pollard in a lineup that's otherwise, pretty contrarian, because I do think Pollard's going to be chalky. Kenneth Walker is my favorite tournament play on FanDuel, $7,400. I think it's a nice price tag. I think the Zach Charbonnet thing has become a little overblown. And I know he's, beat Kenneth Walker in total snaps each of the last 2 weeks, but most of that is coming on passing downs. Zach Charbonnet is playing the majority of the passing downs, which obviously hurts Ken Walker. I'm not saying it doesn't, but Kenneth Walker is still out-carried Zach Charbonnet 36-15 over the last 3 games. So he is still this team's primary ball carrier. I think it's a sneaky good spot, a spot that's better than it might look against the Rams. Just looking at the fantasy points allowed numbers, the Rams are 9th in FanDuel points allowed to running backs. We have them 11th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. That's really because, one, they've limited running back receiving production. I believe they've allowed the fewest receiving yards to running backs this season, which, again, Kenneth Walker is not doing a ton of anyways. And then the Rams have also allowed just 5 total running back touchdowns, which is tied for 6th fewest in the NFL. But again, I think that's a little fluky. If you look at, just their run defense in general, they're 25th in run defense DVOA. They're allowing 4.3 yards per carry through running back. So I really think it's a doable matchup for the Seahawks. This game does have some shootout potential. It's, one of the higher over-unders on the main slate. There's always a chance Kenneth Walker punches in a couple touchdowns because he's still, getting most of that goal line work.
Yeah, you're correct about them allowing the fewest running back receiving yards so far. Their touchdowns allowed are right around the same range for rushing yards allowed. So, it's not necessarily a blow-up spot, but it's also not a scary spot. And if Seattle does get out to a lead, runs the ball plenty, they ran the ball plenty last week, I think there are plenty of opportunities for Kenneth Walker to work out, as you were saying. Wide receiver, we've got expensive wideouts up top in the FanDuel dollars per point. CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all of those 8,900 plus in FanDuel salary. Are you playing any of those guys in your cash lineup?
Yes, I think you can definitely fit one of them in. CeeDee Lamb is a guy I would lean towards, just getting the $600 discount off of Tyreek Hill. Lamb does come in as the top dollars per value play at the position. So I think you can play CeeDee Lamb. I'm playing Garrett Wilson in cash on FanDuel here as well at $7,000. Just the guy has 52 targets over his last 4 games now. And, they're Zach Wilson targets. I don't know what, discount him by 25%. We're still talking to a guy who's, getting, 9-10 real targets. Wilson's averaging 12.6 FanDuel points over the last 4 games, despite not scoring a touchdown. And really this Bills secondary just isn't scary anymore. Since losing Trey White, there's some other injuries they've had on defense as well. So I think it's a fine matchup for Garrett Wilson. I just think he's a good bet for another 10 plus targets.
I think you need to go a little steeper with that discount on the Zach Wilson targets, because to me, it looks like a Groupon email where I'm like, wait a second, why is it discounted that much? That tells me a lot about the quality of this product. I think you need to maybe give it to me for $1. Tournament side wideout, what do you like?
Yeah, DJ Moore. So at $6,800, DJ Moore comes in as our 6th best value at wide receiver. So I really even think he's in play in cash on FanDuel, just because he's been getting targets, right? He has 7.7 targets per game since that quiet week 1 on a 26% target share. And, he's definitely a better tournament play, right? Because you have his quarterback coming off a thumb injury, which obviously adds downside. But if Fields is good to go, and he has been a full go in practice so far this week, so, maybe the thumb is not going to be a factor. We've seen DJ Moore go for 23 FanDuel points and 45 FanDuel points in games already this season. Again, he has a nice combination of the target share, and he had a really big average depth of target in Fields' games, early on this season. So he's getting a lot of deep shots. I do think this Lions-Bears game has some shootout potential. We've seen the Lions defense give up some big wide receiver games lately. So DJ Moore, I like the price tag and the ownership. Again, just 7% projected owned for DJ Moore.
DJ Moore has 3 games this season where he's caught 8 passes. 2 of those he had 130 plus receiving yards. So he's already showed us he can be a ceiling receiver. And the question about Justin Fields coming off the thumb injury is going to keep him from being as highly played in this high upside matchup as he probably would under normal circumstances. So yeah, I think he makes plenty of sense taking shots on him in tournament lineups, knowing that there is downside risk, but that's not what we're worried about when we're playing DFS tournaments. Tight end, we've got high 5K range tight ends leading in the dollars per point category for FanDuel. 3 guys up top. Is there any reason to look beyond that group, or should we just live with that trio?
No, yeah, I think I think for me, especially Dalton Kincaid and Trey McBride are the 2 guys I would look to. We do have Evan Ingram mixed in there too, and he's fine. I mean, he's been an awesome, consistent target bet all season. The Titans are generally bad against the pass. They have been pretty good against tight ends, at least in terms of fantasy, adjusted fantasy points allowed at the position. But it's Kincaid or Musgrave for me. And man, I feel like that decision between those 2, honestly, could impact FanDuel cash games this week. Kincaid and McBride, I think they'll be the 2 most popular. If one outscores the other by 10 points, that could be the difference in cash games. I'm going to, trust our projections and go with Dalton Kincaid, who, we do have projected for, 0.6 more FanDuel points. He's actually $100 cheaper than Trey McBride. Dalton Kincaid has 11 plus FanDuel points in 4 straight games. He's averaging 8 targets per game over the last 4. And really, you can attack this Jets defense. You want to attack this Jets defense with your tight end. The Jets are first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They're just 19th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. So, not saying Stephon Diggs is going to, disappear in this game, but I do think it's a spot where, Kincaid could be an even bigger part of the game plan than usual.
And we've already seen him be a big part. He doesn't need Stephon Diggs to go away to be heavily used. It also might be a way to counter the non-edge linebackers, perhaps getting involved in the pass rush for the Jets. Tournament side.
The guy I have down is Donald Parham, actually. I'm hoping he gets used, right? Because Gerald Everett has not practiced this week yet with a chest injury. Parham has a hip injury. He didn't practice on Wednesday, but he returned to a limited practice on Thursday. So if we get Parham without Everett, I think Parham is a nice tournament play. $5,100. We have seen a game this season with Parham in and Everett out. That was week 8. Parham went 4 catches, 43 yards and a touchdown, saw 5 targets, ran her out on 58% of the pass play. So you're not an ideal route rate. Again, why I would not, consider him in cash, but from a tournament perspective, I think he's up there on this slate in terms of touchdown upside at tight end. Parham leads the Chargers with 7 end zone targets this season, again, despite being a part-time player. And even I think he's missed a couple of games this season too. And among all tight ends, Parham is second in end zone targets with those 7. He's a guy that Herbert looks to when they get near the end zone. And, if Everett's out, I think that only adds to Parham's touchdown potential this week.
Yeah, he's just built for it. So we'll watch him through the weekend. We'll see how healthy he is. We'll see if Gerald Everett has a chance to come back, but certainly like the touchdown upside and that upside for this format on FanDuel. Flex, what are you favoring?
Yeah, a couple more running backs that stand out to me, just volume bets at their price tags. Josh Jacobs, $7,300. I mean, since Antonio Pierce has taken over as their interim head coach, Jacobs has been the focal point of that offense. And there's some downside this week with the Raiders' big underdogs against Miami, but I still think Jacobs will, be involved in the passing game enough. I know he hasn't seen many targets over the last 2 weeks, but I still think he'll be involved in the passing game enough to be okay. And then Breece Hall at $7,100, dominating Jets backfield for a while now. Michael Carter gone, which can only help Breece Hall's passing game role. So I think both those running backs make sense for cash. I think they're actually both nice tournament fades at high ownership just because they're both underdogs this week on pretty bad offenses. So, you kind of wonder about the ultimate upside with both of them. Tournament side, I like Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin, 2 guys that stick out to me, just, both in really good matchups. Deebo against a struggling Bucs secondary, McLaurin against the Giants, who, my God, every single Cowboys wide receiver was just running wide open in that game last Sunday. So nice spot for McLaurin. And then I'm excited to go back to Nico Collins in tournaments this week, coming off the calf injury, which adds some risk, right? But I mean, $7,200 for Nico Collins, projected for just 2% ownership. We have already seen 24 and 32 point FanDuel point outings from him this season. Excellent matchup against the Cardinals. I think, Nico again has, 20, 30 point upside this week.
Yeah, that's the upside of risk is it keeps that ownership down. So you get a boost if the guy
Yeah.
does deliver for you. And we've seen him deliver, as you said. Defense, are we rolling with a 4K option on FanDuel this week? 3 of those lead our FanDuel dollars per point rankings. And I mean, Pittsburgh looks like it just might be the oppressive favorite. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, I would definitely start with the Steelers on defense this week. $4,000. They are projected to be the chalkiest defense by a pretty wide margin, but I think in cash games, that's okay. They're obviously getting Dorian Thompson-Robinson making his second career NFL start. In his first start against the Ravens, 4 sacks and 3 interceptions. The Browns are implied for just 17.25 points. Just should be a ugly, low-scoring defensive battle. So I think the Steelers are a really safe play for cash at just $4,000.
The Browns are in such great shape at quarterback right now that they are trying out Joe Flacco, among others, this week. Now, you talk about the high projected rostered rate for the Pittsburgh D, and usually we want to get away from defenses that are rostered that high, but is this a situation where it's still scary even to fade the dominant number one in projected ownership just because of the matchup here?
I don't think so. I'd actually feel fine fading the Steelers this week because I like the Lions in the same price range at $4,400 and projected for 4% ownership, against Justin Fields, who, has continued to be a high sack rate guy. The Lions are big favorites in that game, so you could get a bunch of Fields dropbacks. The Browns in that same game on the other side of the Steelers are, they're $4,500, so they're $500 more expensive than the Steelers, but just 4% projected ownership. Awesome defense against Kenny Pickett. And then I think the Jets are in play too. I mean, 2% projected ownership for the Jets against Josh Allen, who, they've done well against in all 3 meetings now over the last 2 seasons. That includes scoring 20 points from the Jets defense in their week 1 meeting. So scary to fade the Steelers, but like the Lions and Browns especially have a pretty decent shot to outscore Pittsburgh, and they're coming in at a quarter of the ownership.
Yeah, it's entirely possible for Pittsburgh's defense to dominate that game and not have an enormous can't miss fantasy outing because maybe the Browns score a few points, maybe Pittsburgh doesn't get a defensive touchdown, and some other defense or two do. Do you think that maybe a way to differentiate some Detroit lineups here is to play Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and the Lions defense in the same one because we get a bunch of points from that offense? It presses Justin Fields into more dropbacks and more passes, and that is our clearest path to defensive scoring for the Lions in this game.
I'll never say you can't play a defense that way. I've seen that work too many times in tournaments to say, I don't think it's the ideal way you want that game to play out if you're playing a Goff team, but it could definitely work where, Goff throws 3 first half touchdowns. The Bears are throwing every play in the second half, and the Lions defense gets a late touchdown, on an interception or whatever. So it could definitely work.
Yeah, I would say that it's not the kind of thing you want to look for every week, but this is one of those situations where the nightmare for Chicago is the opponent has forced Justin Fields to throw the ball a whole lot because we know that he can just get bad when that happens.
For sure.
The lineup generator on DraftSharks.com is ready to help you keep things from going bad. It'll help you build winning lineups for week 11, whether you're playing cash games, tournaments, or both. We got our dollars per point that we've been talking about in there, ceiling projections, plus lots more settings for you to mess around with and get the lineups that you want. Make sure you also check out Kevin's articles on DraftSharks.com with more picks for cash games and tournament play on FanDuel this week. Our goal with all this stuff is to help you win week 11.